There are moments in life that shatter you, and then there are moments that rebuild you. For me, the journey began not with a grand gesture, but with a simple, devastating goodbye. I said goodbye to my dying husband, Thomas, as the doctor delivered the final, crushing news. I walked out of that cold hospital room, ready to accept the inevitable, ready to face a world without the man I loved more than anything. I was drowning in grief, in a sea of helplessness and despair. But as I passed through the hospital doors, I overheard two nurses talking. Their casual conversation, just a whisper in the hallway, wasn't about my husband's prognosis. It was about something else. A charity, a foundation, a glimmer of hope. That whisper changed everything. It set in motion a chain of events that would lead me down a path I never expected, one filled with unexpected kindness, tireless struggle, and a revelation so profound it would rewrite my entire understanding of family. Fate, and the very heart beating within my husband's chest. This is the story of how I found a secret I never knew existed, and how a stranger's sacrifice became the miraculous lifeline that saved my husband. A miracle tied to a bond of blood we never knew was there. It's the story of a second chance, born from a whispered secret, and a heart that was destined to save another. To understand the weight of that goodbye, you have to understand the life we built before it. My name is Isabel. I'm a high school history teacher, a job I took not for the summer vacations, but for the quiet, profound joy of watching young minds light up with the past. For me, history wasn't just dates and battles. It was the story of humanity's resilience, a narrative of triumph and endurance. Little did I know, I would soon become a student of that history myself, forced to live out my own epic struggle. Thomas wasn't a man who sought the spotlight. He was a creator, a master potter whose hands could coax beauty from a simple lump of clay. We met at a small farmer's market. He had a stall filled with elegant, imperfectly beautiful mugs and bowls. I bought a simple blue-glazed mug, and as he handed it to me, our fingers brushed. I remember the calluses on his hands, a testament to his work, and the warmth of his smile. He looked at me not with the quick, scanning gaze of a man checking a woman out, but with a deep, soulful curiosity, as if he were trying to read the history in my eyes. Our first date was in his pottery studio. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and possibility. He didn't take me to a fancy restaurant. He taught me how to use the wheel. My first attempt was a lopsided, wobbling mess. His was a perfect, symmetrical vase that seemed to rise effortlessly from the clay. But he didn't laugh at my failure. He knelt beside me, his large, gentle hands covering mine, guiding them, showing me how to find the center, how to apply pressure, how to create. It wasn't just a lesson in pottery, it was a lesson in life. He showed me how to turn chaos into something beautiful. That night, I didn't just fall in love with him. I fell in love with the peace he brought to my life. Our life together was a simple masterpiece. We lived in a cozy, craftsman-style house on the outskirts of town. Our mornings were filled with the smell of my coffee and the quiet hum of his potter's wheel. Our evenings were spent on the porch swing, talking about my students and his latest creations. We weren't rich. He sold his pottery at local markets and online, and my teacher's salary paid the bills. We were happy. We were enough. The one shadow in our perfect little world was the past. Thomas had been abandoned as an infant and raised in the foster care system. He had no family, no history beyond the vague records of the state. He'd never searched for his birth parents, not out of bitterness, but because he felt that family was something you chose, something you built, and I was his family. I was his home. He carried that loneliness with a quiet grace, and I did my best to fill that void with all the love my heart could hold. We often talked about having children, about building the family he never had, but that dream, like so many others, would be put on hold. The first sign of trouble was subtle. Thomas started complaining of a persistent fatigue. He'd come home from the studio exhausted, his hands trembling slightly, and he'd fall asleep on the couch before dinner. I brushed it off as overwork. He was preparing for a big art show, and the pressure was immense. Then came the shortness of breath. He'd be halfway up the stairs and have to stop, gasping for air. I made him an appointment with our family doctor, who assured us it was likely just stress, but it wasn't. The doctor's easy assurances soon gave way to a series of tests, consultations with specialists, and days that bled into weeks of anxious waiting. The diagnosis was a rare form of cardiomyopathy, a disease of the heart muscle that made it difficult for his heart to pump blood effectively. It was a silent, insidious thief, stealing the vitality from a man who was once the very picture of strength and calm. Our life, once a serene river, became a turbulent sea. The tranquil hum of the potter's wheel was replaced by the beeping of hospital monitors. Our cozy home became a place we only visited between hospital stays. Thomas, once so full of life, was now a fragile shadow of himself. His hands, once strong and steady, now shook with a permanent tremor. The man who had taught me to shape clay now needed my help to simply sit up. The doctors tried everything: medication, therapies, everything short of a miracle. The final, devastating blow came from a renowned cardiologist. He sat us down in his sterile, windowless office and delivered the prognosis with a gentle, professional sorrow. "We've exhausted all options. His heart is failing. The only path forward, the only chance for him, is a heart transplant." That's when the real waiting began. The cruel, agonizing wait for a heart that may never come. A heart from a stranger who would have to die for my husband to live. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, saw the slim odds. "I don't want you to hope, Isabel," he said, his voice a frail whisper. "I don't want you to watch me die, and then have to live with the ghost of a hope that never came." But I couldn't stop hoping. I saw the fear in his eyes, the terror of a man who had never had a family, and now feared leaving the one he had. My history classes had taught me about the resilience of the human spirit, about people who fought against impossible odds and emerged victorious. I had to believe in that resilience for him. I had to fight. I spent my days with him, reading to him, holding his hand, trying to fill the sterile hospital room with the warmth of our life. The nights were a lonely vigil, a silent prayer that a donor heart would be found. It was during one of those nights that the doctor delivered the final, most crushing news of all. A blood clot, a complication. Thomas had to be moved to a more critical care unit. The next morning, a different doctor, a younger, more somber man, spoke to me alone. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Henderson. His heart, it's too weak. He's been moved to the top of the transplant list, but we don't have much time." I stood there, the cold hospital air biting at my skin, I went to Thomas's room and I told him goodbye. I didn't say, "I'll see you later." I said goodbye because I genuinely believed I would never see him alive again. My heart felt like it was being ripped from my chest. It was a goodbye, not just to my husband, but to the life we had planned, to the family we had dreamed of, to the future we would never have. I walked out of that hospital room, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was walking into the past, into a future I was never meant to have. The past, once a subject of joyful study, was now my cruel, suffocating reality. Then, as I passed the main corridor, I heard them. 2 nurses, their voices low, their words not meant for my ears. Can you believe they got a donation from that anonymous foundation? All those months they were struggling, and suddenly, I didn't catch the rest, but the words donation, anonymous, and struggling echoed in my head. I had just said goodbye to my husband, but new kind of history was about to begin. A history of hope, of an unseen hand reaching out, of a miracle that was just a whisper away. The air outside the hospital was as cold and sterile as the room I had just left. The world kept turning. Cars rushed past. People laughed on their phones. But my own world had stopped. It was a still, hollow emptiness. And then there was the whisper. It was nothing dramatic. Just 2 nurses huddled together by the staff entrance, clutching their takeaway coffees. I was a ghost to them, a grieving figure they didn't even see. I heard one of them say, "I still can't believe they got the funding." Just when all hope was lost, the St. Christopher's Foundation stepped in. The other one nodded, her voice a low, reverent hum. A true miracle. It's a ghost fund, you know. No one ever knows who's behind it, but they've saved so many lives. Those words, St. Christopher's Foundation, Ghost Fund, saved so many lives, were not just words. They were lifeboats in the ocean of my despair. All the doctor had ever told me was that we needed a miracle. And here, in a random whispered conversation, a miracle had a name. I didn't stop to question it. I didn't know if it was real or just hospital gossip. I just knew that it was a thread, a single, fragile thread of hope, and I had to hold on to it with everything I had. I went home, but it wasn't home anymore. It was just a house filled with Thomas's ghost. His pottery wheel stood silent in the studio, a fine layer of dust already settling on its surface. The blue mug he had made for me sat empty on the kitchen counter. Everything reminded me of what I was about to lose. But now, amidst the grief, there was a flicker of purpose. A new history to be written. I sat at our kitchen table, a laptop open in front of me, and I started my search. St. Christopher's Foundation. My search results were scant, almost non-existent. There were a few articles from local newspapers, all of them vague, talking about an anonymous foundation that had funded crucial surgeries for terminally ill patients. The articles always mentioned how the foundation's identity was a closely guarded secret, how they operated on a need-based and discreet model. It was exactly what the nurse had said, a ghost fund. The more I searched, the more frustrated I became. There was no website, no contact number, no email address. It was as if the foundation existed only in whispers and rumors. For 2 days, I hit dead ends. I was about to give up, to accept that the whisper was just that, an empty whisper, when I noticed a pattern. Every article, every small mention, linked the foundation to one specific hospital. Not the one Thomas was in, but a smaller, more specialized medical center in a nearby town, a place called Providence Heart and Lung. My plan began to form. A desperate, irrational plan, but the only one I had. I put on my best suit, the one I usually reserved for parent-teacher conferences, and drove to Providence Heart and Lung. I walked into the lobby, and the first thing I noticed was the small gold plaque on the wall, sponsored by the St. Christopher's Foundation. My heart leapt into my throat. The whisper was real. I spent the next several hours talking to anyone who would listen. Receptionists, administrators, even a kind security guard. I told them Thomas's story. I showed them his medical records. I told them about his art, about the gentle soul behind those shaken hands. I poured my heart out, all the while knowing I was begging a faceless entity for a chance at life. The hospital staff, while sympathetic, couldn't give me a contact. They all said the same thing. The Foundation reaches out to us. We don't reach out to them. I left the hospital feeling defeated, but not broken. I decided I wouldn't leave it to fate. I would make myself a walking, talking embodiment of Thomas's story. I returned to the hospital every single day. I brought Thomas's photos. I brought a small, beautiful ceramic bowl he had just finished before his symptoms worsened. I sat in the waiting room and talked to anyone who would listen. I talked to other families, to doctors on their lunch breaks, to cleaners. I became the face of a desperate plea, a plea for a ghost fund to notice us. The days stretched into a week into 2. Thomas was getting weaker. He was drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors at his hospital were preparing me for the worst. My phone was my lifeline, but it remained silent. No calls from any foundation, no miracles, just the steady, agonizing drip of time slipping away. I started to lose hope. Maybe it was too late. Maybe the whisper was just a cruel joke. I was sitting by Thomas's bedside, reading to him from a book of poetry, when my phone finally rang. It was an unknown number. My hand trembled as I answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and full of empathy. "Hello. This is Dr. Eleanor Vance from the St. Christopher's Foundation. I believe you have been trying to reach us about your husband, Thomas Henderson." Tears streamed down my face. I could barely speak. I confirmed who I was. And she told me she had heard my story. She told me the staff at Providence Heart and Lung had been moved by my persistence. She told me she had reviewed Thomas's case, and she had good news. The foundation was prepared to offer full funding for Thomas's experimental heart transplant surgery. I collapsed into tears of relief, the poetry book falling from my hands. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the impossible, beautiful words that a stranger was giving my husband a second chance. But that wasn't the full story. Dr. Vance also told me that they had found a potential heart. A young woman, just 26 years old, had been involved in a tragic accident and was declared brain dead. Her family, in a selfless act of profound grace, had decided to donate her organs. Thomas was the most suitable match. The operation was scheduled for the next day. A wave of emotions washed over me. Relief, gratitude, and a heartbreaking sorrow for the young life that had been lost. I told Thomas the news. He was weak, but his eyes lit up. He held my hand and squeezed it with what little strength he had. "Isabel, you did this," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You were my hope." The next day, Thomas was wheeled into the operating room. I stood in the waiting area, a small, quiet space filled with the ghosts of prayers and hopes. I clutched the little ceramic bowl Thomas had made, the one I had brought to Providence heart and lung every day. I sat there for hours, praying for 2 hearts, the one in the operating room and the one that was gone. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The heart of a stranger would save my husband's life, but it was a heart with a story, a history of its own, a history that was about to become inextricably linked with ours. The journey I had started with a whisper of hope was about to lead me to a secret hidden in the very depths of my husband's newly beating heart. It was a secret that would not only give him a future, but would reveal a family he never knew he had. The hospital waiting room was a study in stillness, a place where time stretched and warped into an eternity. It was a space defined by the unspoken weight of what was happening behind closed doors. I sat there, clutching the small, blue-glazed mug that Thomas had made for me, a simple object that now held all the love, all the hope, and all the fear in my world. Every minute felt like an hour. Every distant sound, the rolling of a gurney, a nurse's hurried footsteps, made my heart leap. I replayed everything in my mind. Our first date, the feel of his calloused hands on mine, the day we bought our small house, the silence of his pottery studio. I thought about the other family, the one that had lost a daughter, a sister, a friend. I carried the weight of their grief alongside my own desperate prayer for Thomas's survival. It felt selfish to hope for a new heart for my husband, knowing it came from a life that had ended too soon. Hours bled into one another. A nurse came and offered me water, but I couldn't drink. A family with a newborn baby walked past, their laughter a sharp, painful contrast to the silence in my soul. I was a student of history, and I knew that this was the kind of moment that changed everything, the kind of moment where one timeline ends and another begins. The clock on the wall seemed to mock me, its hands moving with a glacial, agonizing slowness. Finally, a doctor approached me. Dr. Miller, the lead surgeon. He looked exhausted, his face grim, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a kind of guarded optimism. "Isabel," he began, his voice low. "The surgery was a success. The new heart is beaten on its own. It's strong. He's stable." A gasp of relief escaped my lips, and tears, hot and heavy, finally came. I had held them back for so long, and now they came in a torrent. "He's stable," the words echoed in my mind, the most beautiful words I had ever heard. He explained the post-operative procedures, the medication, the long road to recovery, but all I heard was, "He's stable." I was allowed to see him, just for a moment, in the intensive care unit. He was pale, hooked up to an array of machines, but his chest was rising and falling with a steady, peaceful rhythm. The heart of a stranger was now beating inside him, keeping my husband alive. I leaned down and whispered to him, "You're a fighter, Thomas. Always a fighter." The relief was overwhelming, but as the initial joy subsided, a new feeling took hold, an immense, powerful need to know. Who was this person? Who was the guardian angel who had given my husband a second chance? I had promised myself I would find her family and thank them for their immeasurable sacrifice. It was the least I could do. The hospital's policy was to maintain strict anonymity for both donors and recipients. But my conversations with Dr. Vance from the St. Christopher's Foundation had opened a door. The foundation had a discreet way of honoring the donor's legacy, and they could facilitate communication if both families agreed. I filled out the necessary paperwork immediately, eager to express my gratitude. A week later, while Thomas was still in recovery, Dr. Vance called me. "Isabel, the donor's family has agreed to a meeting. We've sent you a file with some basic information about her. We thought it might help you get to know her before you meet her family." My hands trembled as I opened the attached file on my laptop. It was a simple page. Donor information. The name was Clara Henderson. The photo was of a vibrant, smiling young woman with bright, intelligent eyes. I stopped breathing. The name. The eyes. They were Thomas's eyes. It couldn't be a coincidence. My historian's mind, trained to spot patterns and connections, screamed that this was no random match. I scrolled down, my heart pounding in my ears. I saw the results of the compatibility tests, a long list of numbers and chemical markers. At the bottom of the page was a small note from the lab. A routine genetic marker analysis had been performed. I saw a line of code, an alphanumeric sequence that was a perfect match to a similar sequence in Thomas's chart, a sequence that indicated a rare and specific genetic trait. It was a detail I had never paid attention to, but now it was screaming at me. I ran to the hospital and pulled up Thomas's chart. My hands shook so badly I could barely type. I navigated to the genetics section, comparing the sequences. They were identical. My mind raced back to Dr. Vance's initial explanation of why Thomas was the best match. It wasn't just about blood type. It was about a deeper, more profound genetic similarity. The hospital staff had just attributed it to a remarkable coincidence. But I knew better. I ran back to my car, my mind a storm of disbelief and dawning truth. I called Dr. Vance. I didn't want to accuse, just to understand. I asked her, my voice trembling, if there was any way the donor and Thomas could be related. She paused, and I knew. The silence was my answer. "It's extremely rare," she said, her voice careful. "But genetically, yes. They share a very high percentage of genetic markers. It's a level of similarity you would see in a close relative." I went home and sat on the cold floor of the pottery studio, surrounded by Thomas's creations. He had always yearned for a family, for a connection he'd never had. And here it was, not a long-lost brother or a distant cousin, but a sister he never knew he had, who had given him the ultimate gift, her heart, her life, the very thing he had always searched for, a family bond, was now beating inside his chest. I sat there, the full weight of the climax crashing down on me. Thomas was alive. He had a future, but it had come at an unspeakable cost. The life of a woman he had never met, a woman who was, in fact, his own flesh and blood. The climax wasn't just his survival. It was the birth of a secret so profound, so heartbreakingly beautiful, that it would change our lives forever. My husband's new heart was not just a miracle of medicine, it was a miracle of destiny. The days that followed were a surreal tapestry, woven with threads of immense joy and profound sorrow. Thomas was on the slow, arduous road to recovery, his body accepting the new heart with a miraculous, yet fragile grace. But his emotional landscape was a different battlefield entirely. The man who'd once been so emotionally self-contained, a quiet, gentle soul from the foster care system, was now navigating a storm of identity and loss. The day I told him about Clara, the silence in the room had been deafening. It wasn't the silence of shock, but of a soul absorbing a truth so massive it threatened to unmoor him. His hand, once so steady on the potter's wheel, now trembled as he held the photo of his sister. Her eyes, he'd whispered, his voice a fragile echo of his former self. I always thought. I don't know what I thought, but they are my eyes. My role shifted from being a caregiver to a keeper of this sacred, sorrowful history. I was the bridge between Thomas's past and his present. He was the recipient of a medical miracle, but also the living embodiment of a family's ultimate sacrifice. I spent hours talking to him, not about his physical recovery, but about Clara. I learned every detail I could from Dr. Vance and the social worker who had handled the case. Clara was not just a name and a face. She was a life full of music and dreams. A pianist with a talent that lit up the small jazz club where she played. A daughter who cared for her elderly parents with fierce devotion. A woman who, in her final act, had given life to a brother she never knew existed. I knew that for Thomas to truly heal, he had to connect with her, to understand the person whose heart now beat within his chest. I convinced him that he had a right to know her, to honor her. After weeks of steady recovery, I arranged the first meeting with Clara's parents. The social worker acted as a mediator, guiding us through the delicate protocol of such a reunion. The meeting took place in a small, private room at a neutral location. The air was thick with anticipation and sorrow. Clara's parents, Eleanor and George, were a picture of quiet grief and immense dignity. They had heard of the remarkable genetic similarity, but had not been told the full, heartbreaking truth. As I introduced Thomas, Eleanor's eyes immediately went to his face, and then she gasped. "My God," she said, a hand flying to her mouth. "He has Clara's eyes." It was a moment that transcended words. George, Clara's father, a man of few words, walked over and simply placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder, as if confirming the impossible reality. For the first time in his life, Thomas wasn't just a patient or a friend's husband. He was a son, a part of a family. They cried, not with a raw, painful sorrow, but with the quiet, healing tears of a family finding a missing piece of itself. They had lost a daughter, but they had received a son. Over the next few months, their relationships deepened. Thomas, whose childhood had been defined by a lack of roots, now had a sprawling family tree. He and I would visit Eleanor and George every weekend. We'd look at Clara's photos, listen to her old recordings, and Thomas would ask them 100 questions about her life. What was her favorite food? Did she love the rain? What was her biggest dream? He was, in a way, living for two, embodying her spirit and honoring her memory. The scar on his chest was a constant physical reminder, but his love for his new family was a deep, emotional one. I, in turn, learned to navigate this new family dynamic. I was not just Isabel, Thomas's wife, but a link, a cherished friend to Eleanor and George. We shared our grief and our joy. I'd listen as Eleanor would talk about Clara's laugh, a sound she thought she'd never hear again. And I'd watch as she'd find a flicker of that laughter in Thomas's quiet smile. It was a beautiful, difficult, and profoundly human experience. Thomas's physical recovery was a testament to his strength and the miracle of medicine. But his emotional recovery was a testament to the power of family. He found a new purpose in his pottery. He started creating pieces inspired by Clara's music. He'd spend hours in the studio, the sound of her piano recordings filling the space. His hands shaping the clay with a newfound passion. He called the collection Clara's Melody. Each piece was a tribute to her, to the life she had lived, and to the life she had given him. The journey was not without its challenges. There were days of sadness, days when the sheer weight of it all would bring Thomas to his knees. He would feel a surge of guilt, a sense that his happiness was built on someone else's tragedy. I would remind him that Clara's family, in their selfless act of donation, had given a gift. The best way to honor a gift is to use it fully, to live a life full of purpose and joy. Eventually, Thomas was healthy enough to go back to work. He didn't just sell his art at the local market anymore. He held an exhibition for his Clara's Melody collection. The opening was a huge success. Every piece was sold, and the funds went to a new cause. With the money he made, and the initial funds from the St. Christopher's Foundation that had, in a way, brought all of this to light, he established a foundation of his own, the Clara Henderson Fund for Organ Donation Awareness. He wanted to honor his sister's memory by helping others find a second chance at life. His purpose had shifted from creating beautiful objects to creating a beautiful legacy. The quiet man from the foster care system was now a community leader, a philanthropist, and a symbol of hope. Our life was full again, but it was a different kind of full. We had a new family, a new purpose, and a new understanding of what it meant to live. The house was no longer just our home. It was a testament to a life saved, a family found, and a legacy born from an act of selfless love. The scar on Thomas's chest was no longer just a scar. It was a roadmap of a journey from despair to hope, from loneliness to family. And in the silent, steady rhythm of his new heart, I could hear a beautiful, eternal melody. The months that followed Thomas's recovery weren't a return to our old life, but the beautiful, challenging birth of a new one. The hum of the pottery studio returned, but it was now a different kind of hum. It was a melody, a tribute, a continuous conversation between a man and the heart beating inside him. Thomas's hands, once frail and trembling, were now steady and full of a renewed purpose. He no longer just created beautiful things, he created legacies. He finished his Clara's Melody collection, a series of vases and bowls inspired by the rhythm and soul of her music. Each piece was a story, a vessel holding a part of the past that had brought him to the present. The exhibition for the collection was not just an art show. It was a testament to a life saved and a family found. The room was filled with our friends, Thomas's new family, and even some of the kind nurses from the hospital who had overheard that fateful conversation. Standing there, watching Thomas talk to them, his face alive with gratitude and a quiet joy, I knew that the man I had married was no longer the lonely boy from foster care. He was a man with a past, a present, and a legacy that was both his and Clara's. The proceeds from the exhibition, along with a significant donation from the St. Christopher's Foundation, became the seed money for the Clara Henderson Foundation for Organ Donation Awareness. It was a dream Thomas and I built together. a tangible way to honor the woman who had given him a second chance. The Foundation's mission was simple: to educate people about the importance of organ donation and to provide financial assistance to families navigating the complex, expensive journey of transplant surgery. Our small, cozy home became the headquarters for a cause far bigger than ourselves. Thomas, the quiet potter, became an advocate, a public speaker, a voice for the voiceless. He would share his story with anyone who would listen, always starting with a simple phrase: "My heart beats for two." For me, the journey was a profound lesson in the power of humanity. As a history teacher, I had always believed in the grand narratives of courage and resilience. But living through this, I learned that the most powerful acts of courage aren't always found in history books. They are found in the quiet, selfless decisions of a family to give life in the face of death. They are found in the persistence of a desperate wife who wouldn't give up. They are found in the strength of a man who chooses to live not just for himself, but for the one who gave him the chance. Our life, though different, was richer, fuller. We had Eleanor and George, who became the grandparents to the children we never had. They would come over for Sunday dinners, and Thomas would tell them about his new pottery, and Eleanor would tell us stories about Clara as a little girl. We learned that grief and joy can coexist, that a heart can mourn for a life that was lost while simultaneously beating with gratitude for a life that was saved. We were a family, not by blood alone, but by a shared history of love, loss, and an unbreakable bond forged in destiny. The scar on Thomas's chest faded, but it never disappeared. It was a constant reminder, a symbol of a life almost lost, and a legacy that was just beginning. It was a roadmap of a journey from despair to hope, from loneliness to family, and in the silent, steady rhythm of his new heart, I could hear a beautiful, eternal melody, a melody of hope, of resilience, of love, a melody that, in the end, was not just Thomas's story, but ours. This story is a testament to the fact that miracles don't always come from a higher power. Sometimes they come from the quiet, immense goodness of people who choose to give. It's a message that hope can be found even in the darkest of places, in a whisper, in a hospital hallway, in a stranger's heart, in the love you hold for the people around you. So, to all of you who are watching, I want you to remember this: never stop fighting, never stop hoping, and never forget that the most profound bonds aren't always the ones you are born with. Sometimes they are the ones you find along the way. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever experienced a moment of unexpected hope or a kindness that changed your life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories of resilience and hope, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.